Today, we will consider this concept of trust and the spiritual importance of trusting God. Do you feel that you trust God? Do you ever think about that? Or what that means? I mean, trust is a common word, and it's used in our modern language in a lot of different ways. So today we're going to focus on the concept of trust the way Isaiah understood it. A word to describe a healthy, love-based relationship with God and with reality. All relationships require a certain amount of trust, right? You ever known someone you couldn't trust? What was your relationship with that person who you couldn't trust? Probably not very good, right? When we can trust somebody, right, it's a basis of relationship, right? A much more positive and engaging relationship is possible with someone we can trust, of course. And what happens when you can really fully trust somebody? I mean, when you can share everything with them from your heart without worrying that they might take advantage of what you tell them or use that information against your best interests. That's a very deep trust. Have you experienced that before? Isaiah is talking about trusting God that much and probably a lot more than that. As we heard in today's scripture reading, Isaiah puts a lot of emphasis on trusting God. Right? For Isaiah, it's not believe and be saved. It's trust in God and be at peace. Isaiah is a really important prophet for us to hear for a lot of reasons. For one thing, Jesus quoted Isaiah a lot. Have you ever noticed that? Jesus seemed to admire Isaiah or certainly appreciated what Isaiah had to say. Isaiah said a lot about the poor. The prophet Isaiah, in this case, uses the concept of trust to describe his relationship, or maybe more accurately, his experience of God. Isaiah's experience of God was deep and abiding. And that experience felt like trust to Isaiah. And that trust led to peace. Now, peace in the scriptures is not really the same as our modern idea of peace, but it's the ancient Jewish concept of shalom. Shalom gets interpreted as the English word peace, but really it's not quite the same thing. It's close. The Jewish concept of shalom includes nonviolence as the modern term, but it also includes completeness, well-being, wholeness. Now, do you normally associate wholeness with peace? Well, Isaiah did in using the word shalom. Peace is, in this context, a state of being, a level of awareness that goes beyond a lack of welfare or an absence of violence, well beyond it. It's a way of life, a way of experiencing each other. Isaiah describes a deep trust that can be felt in each moment, a deep trust that results in wholeness, in shalom. This level of trust in God can be difficult to explain because it's an experience. It's not so much a concept or an idea. If you have not experienced it, it's difficult to wrap your brain around it because it's not a brain, it's a heart thing. Isaiah sings about a trust in God that is so deep that the love of God and the love of neighbor flow naturally from our hearts. Imagine trusting God more than you trust yourself. That experience of trusting God more than you trust yourself. That's the level of trust that Isaiah is highlighting in this song, in music, which is what today's scripture is. It's a song written by Isaiah based on his experience of God, based on his experience of God that felt him like trust and that brought him great peace, like a rock. When our trust in God is that deep, we begin to see the folly of chasing after our own desires, and we naturally seek God's will instead. It's the kind of trust that Jesus exemplifies. It's a trust that makes us feel safe, almost carefree, because we know we can feel that we are totally in God's hands, even when we're facing terrible and deadly circumstances. That level of trust. This is a trust that goes far beyond belief, far beyond logic, and approaches the realm of unconditional love as a relationship, as a connection to God, to reality. This kind of trust in God takes time to develop, to mature, and to become a fact of everyday life. I don't know if we ever quite get there. It's the direction we go. Trusting deeply in God does not mean that bad things aren't going to happen to us. Trusting in God means that we face our challenges with wholeness, with peace, and with love. As an example of those things. Trusting in God does not mean that we get our own way or that all our personal expectations in life will be satisfied. Trusting in God means trusting in God's plan for everyone, not our own plan. That deep a trust. Total, mature trust in God leads to shalom, wholeness, peace of mind, well-being, despite our circumstances. And allows us to be the most positive impact we can be within our circumstances. When we trust in God that deeply, worry, almost impossible. You're not going to worry. You can't. Isaiah says we will be at peace. Doesn't say we're going to be treated well by others necessarily. Jesus trusted fully in God, and his path was very difficult. And he was treated really poorly. Trust is connected to the heart more so than to the head. Yet, we often hear Christians teaching more about belief, much more than we hear about trust. Belief, at least in modern times, is more about the head than the heart, or when it is. When belief is more about the head than the heart. And we've got a problem. We may have an issue. We can have all the right beliefs and still be hard of heart, still be cold, still be unable to love God enough to trust God. You've got to be careful about that. This is an unfortunate result of language translations and changing times. We know how we got here. In modern times, belief and trust are two different things. It wasn't always that way. We too often work to get our beliefs correct, to get the facts right, rather than focusing on trust, as suggested by Isaiah. To believe in Jesus and to trust in God were the same thing in the early church. They used to be the same. In the ancient Greek language, they were the same. In the original language of the New Testament. Belief and trust mean two different things now, and that fact is really important to understand if we're going to grow beyond belief in our loving relationship with God, with reality, and with each other. The problem with the modern English word belief is that it lacks the element of trust that was part of the original teachings of the church. Belief in modern times is usually just a mental agreement with the facts, right? Is that what belief is in modern times? I agree with those facts. That's too often what it is. Not for everyone, but often that's what it is. Belief does not necessarily imply relationship or love or trust in modern usage. Trust, on the other hand, in modern usage does imply deep relationship, which is why the word is used by Isaiah in this song. In the early church, trusting Jesus was salvation rather than belief. Belief has taken stage in modern Christianity rather than trust, mostly because of a translational problem, a technicality. The ancient Greek word for belief is wrapped around the concept of trust and faith. The modern word is not. The Greek word of interest here is a word that's all over the place in the New Testament. I'm not a Greek scholar. I'm not an expert in pronunciation in particular, but it's something like pistos. And it's an incredibly important word to understand because it is the word that gets translated into the modern English word belief or believe or believe in. Believe in is an attempt to bring trust into the word believe. Add that word in. It does have that effect if we're listening. There is no English word that equals this Greek word pistios. This happens a lot in translations. It makes translations very difficult. So every time we see the modern word belief in the New Testament, we need to be careful how we read it and how we understand it. And how we read it and how we understand it is going to change as we grow spiritually. The original English translations of the Bible, when this was first done, when the Bible was first translated into English, the translator had to pick an English word. He didn't have a choice. What word should I use for pistos? They decided on to use the word belief rather than trust. It was a good decision at the time. The reason they picked that word is complex, but these choices were made 500 years ago. And the English word believe was very different even then to what it is now. In those days, you didn't believe in scientific facts, right? The scientific revolution hadn't occurred yet. You believed in people. That's how the word was used. For example, someone might say, I believe in the king. Okay. In the 1500s, this was a strong statement of trust in the king. It didn't matter what the king said. The facts were not important. I trust the king, period. That's the way it was used. That's what it meant to believe someone back then. It's more, when you say I believe, you didn't believe the facts. The word wasn't used that way. You believed people. So when the Bible was originally translated into English, the word belief made good sense. And it included the concept of trust. The interpreters were inspired. I'm not trying to criticize them. The point is, since these translational decisions were made, our use of the word believe has changed significantly. Instead of believing in a person, we started to believe in facts due to the advent of scientific thinking. And there's a lot of good that comes from this. We can be careful how it impacts us spiritually. In modern English, belief means the acceptance of or agreement with a certain fact or set of facts. It doesn't really imply trust anymore. This is kind of disastrous if we're not aware of it. And a lot of us aren't. It's more like that you're convinced that something is correct, that it's true. Well, you should believe it. Okay. The element of trust just isn't part of the English word for most of us, the way it was when the Bible was written or when it was first translated into English. And even the word believe, the way it was used back then when the Bible was first translated to English, held only a fraction of the meaning of the original ancient Greek word used by the biblical writers. All right, this might sound kind of academic, and it is, like a lesson from a college linguistics class or a seminary class, and it is, but it's important. It's important for us as Christians in modern America to know this, because it can help us move forward to establish a better relationship with God and each other. And again, the point is, that we just need to be careful when we encounter the word believe in the New Testament. Because when the Bible was first written, believe in Jesus meant the exact same thing as trust in Jesus or have faith in Jesus today. The measure of spiritual growth in the ancient church was your depth of trust, not the accuracy of your belief about a set of facts. In modern Christianity, we've struggled with this concept because our modern use of the word believe leads us down a path where instead of trusting Jesus, we get hung up on trying to believe or trust in facts about Jesus. Some churches, without any malintent, get especially hung up on this to the point that they require their members to attest to a set of facts about Jesus in order to be a member and exclude anyone who won't agree with their set of facts. Now, believing, I don't want to be too harsh here, because believing and learning facts or concepts is a great starting point. It's important, but it'll only take us so far. It's not the end point. It's not what the New Testament was talking about exactly. Focusing on the facts about Jesus has left many believers uncertain about their own salvation. Our brains are both a miracle, capable of unbelievable feats, and they're also very faulty. Sometimes forgetting simple facts, or worse, falling into dementia. Do you ever worry if your beliefs are good enough, are biblical enough to ensure you're saved? Our worry about salvation can be an indication of our lack of trust in God. It's the irony here. Once we learn to trust God fully, our worries surrounding our own salvation melt away. We just trust God with that. It's not about what we believe. It's not trust in our own heads. We trust God with it fully. We can stare death in the face and still find peace, because we trust God with that. It's like Isaiah's everlasting rock. When someone asks me if I'm saved, I usually reply, I trust God with that. Whatever our beliefs might be, when we fully trust God, we will want God's plan and we will want God's will to be done. That's central. That's where the rubber meets the road. I trust God so much that I trust the plan. Not my plan, not my will, but your will be done, Lord. Sound like a meditation we did this morning? I think it's a good meditation to do every morning. Wanting God's will to be done is not so much a statement of belief, but a trusting relationship that unfolds as we live our lives. It's beautiful. It's incredible. There's a direct connection between our relationship with God and our relationship with others. This was central to Jesus' message and the example that Jesus provides us. You remember what Jesus said when he was asked what was most important, right? Maybe I'll repeat this a lot. What's the most important commandment? Love God, love neighbor. Love is a word to describe a healthy relationship. It's not a word that applies to facts about someone, but it's our connection to that person, to them. A deep, trusting relationship with God is a loving relationship. They're the same thing. Just believing in God may or may not be a relationship. If it is, beautiful. If it's not, you got some work to do. That's okay. So do I. I got work to do too. We all do. Just agreeing with a set of facts might be something in our head, but a full relationship with God requires our hearts as well. We know this, right? Relationships must be experienced. And a deep, trusting relationship with God brings an experience that is described as shalom, wholeness. When we know when our trust in God grows because our shalom, our peace grows with it. Not in some Pollyanna way, but with our eyes wide open. When we lose our trust in God, our peace is lost as well, usually. When Jesus prayed in the garden, facing his own death, what did he pray? Take this cup from me, Lord, but not my will. Your will be done. Not my will. Is a prayer of trust. Is the prayer of trust. It's a prayer that says, I realize that God knows what's best, not just for me, but for everyone. I accept that as the foundational principle of which I am going to conduct my day and my relationships with others. Isaiah teaches us that it's possible to grow spiritually to the point of trusting in God like a rock, where our trust is greater than any force fear might face. Building this level of trust is one of our primary reasons for being a church. It's a process, one that is unique for each person. There is no one creed, covenant, or approach that works for everyone. For some people, it may start with believing the facts. That's okay. But if our belief is to grow into trust, it generally requires some effort on our part to get to know God. And eventually, the highest level of trust, like described by Isaiah, requires the healing grace of God. We can't really get there on our own. If you think you can, then you're trusting in yourself. Right? Foundational principle of Christianity. The scripture passage we read today was Isaiah singing about his experiences of God, about the shalom that comes from this deep trust. Eventually, when we have experienced a deepening relationship of trust with God, the word printed as believe in our English language, in our English Bibles, will start to make more sense to us when we read it as trust. It'll be deeper. It'll be more helpful to us. But such trust must be grown from a seed, and we nurture the seed with our spiritual practices. So, say we're at the stage where we believe in God, how do we build our trust? What do? We could start with the big things. For example, we might start right off with trusting God with our life and our death. What's bigger than that? Might start there. That might be too big, though. Often it is. That's actually our destination. Some people can start there. Most of us, though, are better off maybe starting with smaller things. Right? I've talked about it before. Maybe an example of dealing small things, one example of many, is to look at our own worries and our own fears. We can learn a lot about what we trust in when we learn to understand the source of our worries and our fears. Watch your worries and fears. Write them down. Pray and meditate about them. Listen for God's guidance. Discern. When our worries are not rational, or there are things that are out of our control, start by trusting God with those things. They're out of our control anywhere, right? This is a practice. We have to engage in it. Use that as a starting place. Worries and fears rob us of our shalom. These are just a few examples that hopefully move us forward to believe, to have faith, and as we mature spiritually, to trust God deeply. Not intellectually, but to experience life that way. And when we do, we'll be walking the path that Jesus walked. Thy will be done. Not my will, Lord. Thy will be done. That's the level of trust we seek. As sung by Isaiah, as lived by Jesus Christ, as practiced by the early church, and as a foundational principle of St. John's United Church of Christ in Owosso.